There was a time when the mainstream media was the beacon of truth. Trusted voices echoed through the airways, and headlines shaped the way we view the world. But something changed.
Following a number of lawsuits, settlements, and a decrease in viewership, the mainstream media is going through it.
Today, we live in an era where trust in media is at an all-time low.
Yeah, we don't trust any of these. No one trusts the government. No one trusts the common news.
Newsrooms once driven with integrity are now being driven by ratings and agendas.
News organization, can you give us a chance?
Your organization
you are attacking our news.
You are fake news.
Sir,
go ahead.
Can you
posted, quote, the Food Channel is outdueling MSNBC and CNN.
You kind of did kill mainstream media, if you think about it.
I did. Truth is no longer absolute, and the question looms over all of our heads. Who can we believe? Who's shaping the narrative? And why?
Joe Rogan has gotten so popular, it is insane. I'm actually kind of surprised.
This show is not going to be typical. That's how you change the game.
Russia's president has used a sit-down interview with Tucker Carlson to give his own version of history.
According to Gallup, in the 1970s, only 70% of Americans trusted the media to report the news honestly. Today, that number is just 31%. I had to really sit down with myself and think, why? To know the answer to that question, we first have to look back on history to see what might have influenced this change. The Vietnam War, a war where we thought to be a fight against communism, became a lesson in misjudgment. The truth was hidden deep inside government propaganda until the Pentagon Papers were revealed by Daniel Ellsberg. These papers exposed a shocking reality, how the US leaders knew that they were fighting a losing war but didn't care, still fought on and lost hundreds of thousands of people in one of the bloodiest wars ever. It ended with the US losing the war and Vietnam winning the war in 1975. Decades later, a new crisis emerged. That crisis was COVID-19. This time, the battle wasn't overseas. It was here in our own homes and in our own hospitals. Many felt the media wasn't very transparent, from mask mandates to COVID vaccine debates. Questions about vaccine risks or other treatments were silenced, and people began to feel like they weren't being told the full story. It wasn't just confusion, it felt like complete manipulation. And I'm not making all this up. Mark Zuckerberg admitted on social media that the government was pressuring him to silence other vaccine-related debates or other vaccine-related topics to push out an agenda to take the vaccine. And media outlets such as CNN, MSNBC, BBC weren't all innocent either. They all had their own brainwashing techniques, political bias, and propaganda. Years later, this confirmed what many suspected. The media wasn't trying to push out the truth, but rather an agenda. And then Donald Trump, whether you like him or hate him, cried fake news and corrupt news. He poured gasoline on what was already raging fire. Whether you agree with him or disagree with him, his words resonated. You have to understand, the media no longer serves the public. It serves corporate interests, political narratives, and the pursuit of profit. News stories are not crafted to give you the truth, but to engage, manipulate, and exploit. The question isn't necessarily about what mainstream corporate outlet you should trust, but rather if you should trust any of them at all. Then figures like Joe Rogan entered in, who wasn't necessarily a media mogul. All he had was a microphone, sat down in front of people and asked them questions. The Joe Rogan Experience, which is his podcast show, began to really interest people because it felt raw, it felt authentic. They felt like they could get news and insights about different things in this podcast. A space where politicians, scientists, different figures can all speak freely, sit down, have an unfiltered conversation about whatever they wanted to talk about. The shift didn't just change how they got their news and all their insights, but rather how they viewed the world. And the political landscape wasn't just immune to the shift, it was heavily affected. Take this year for example. Donald Trump, a man who is famously at war with mainstream media, by appearing on platforms such as Full Send and other independent creators, he bypassed traditional gatekeepers, speaking directly to millions of people who wanted to tune in into the podcast or show or wherever he went. People saw a different side of Donald Trump that was raw, unfiltered, that wasn't really seen by politicians before. Many believe that this was the most pivotal moment of this year for him to win the 2024 election. And it's not just Trump. We've had scientists, philosophers, different figures go on there and advertise themselves. They've gained publicity, they've gained people liking them, people disliking them. They are able to speak freely without having to go to other mainstream outlets for an interview. This is going to affect the political landscape forever. We're going to be talking about different politicians who are running to be president. They're going to be going on different platforms platforms such as Full Send, Joe Rogan, all these different podcasts to be able to gain publicity and to see a side of them that we as normal citizens never got to see from politicians. But regardless, there is still a downside to all of this. As trust in traditional media crumbles, we're left in a dangerous place. Echo chambers.
For decades, young men and women in the U.S. had similar political ideologies on average. That's changed over the last 6 years. A Financial Times analysis of Gallup data found American Gen Z women are 30 percentage points more liberal than their male counterparts.
Feminism and the left in the present day do absolutely nothing to support men. They do the opposite. They demonize, they stigmatize, and they ignore their problems.
It's your body, my choice.
Apparently there is a question going viral on TikTok right now that asks, would you rather be alone in the woods with a man or a bear? And a considerable number of women said they'd rather take their chances with the bear.
You see, it's no longer about seeking the truth, but rather seeking validation. We gravitate towards voices that mirror our own and ideologies that affirm what we already believe. In this landscape, the line between truth and opinion begin to dissolve. The rise of my truth has given every perspective equal weight. Facts have taken a backseat to feelings, and objectivity has no longer been the measure of truth, even when it contradicts reality. We've become prisoners of our own creation, trapped in bubbles of agreement. We no longer hear the other side, but rather want to stay in our own bubbles and our own sides to just further and further and further distance the gap between left and right, or up or down, or the center itself. Echo chambers don't challenge us, they isolate us, shielding us from the complexity of opposing ideas. When we listen to only those who agree with us, we lose sight of each other, all of us. We lose sight of the bigger picture of trying to connect, trying to find the similarities between us or debate it out. We simply just resent the other side and we don't want to hear from them anymore. We stop being curious, we stop asking questions. We just start to distance ourselves from the other side. And in the silence of dissent, the truth becomes harder to find. In the world suffocating under the weight of lies and manipulation, the fight for free speech and the truth has become our very battle for our very own future. Will we rise to reclaim the truth, hold every single person accountable, and think critically? Or will we stand by and let it fade to oblivion? The choice is ours. And make no mistake, history is watching.
False news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish things that aren't true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy. Extremely dangerous to our democracy. Extremely dangerous to our democracy.